Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
That's right, you're at Aggressive Negotiations, the Star Wars podcast that prides itself on getting into the nitty-gritty of the Star Wars galaxy. And boy, with a galaxy this large, there's not only a lot of nitty, but a whole lot of gritty. I am one of your hosts, Jedi Master John Mills, and joining me on this journey of exploration is Jedi Master Matthew Rushing. Matt, what is your latest discovery that you bring to us today here in the cafeteria of the Jedi Temple?
Wow. I mean, I just brought this plate of cookies that are shaped like Yoda. And
cookies.
I hope that's okay.
It's absolutely okay so long as there are plenty of midichlorians in them, because midichlorian cookies, you know what? Now I'm thinking in terms of a cartoon for Star Wars where, like spinach, there's like a can of midichlorians and somebody can consume them and become a superhero like Popeye.
So is that like melange
which would be
spice and Dune? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Right? Like, can you distill a ton of midichlorians? You know what? Topic for a different day. Be sure to go over to thenerdparty.com and go to thenerdparty.com/contact. Look up Aggressive Negotiations. Drop us a line. We do, in fact, try to engage with people. It's more difficult than we'd like to admit, but we do try. And you can, of course, reach out to us on the social networks at the Jedi Masters on Twitter, and look for @JoyNerdParty on Twitter for the network, or you can find the Nerd Party on Facebook and Instagram. I feel like I say that every week, and so I try to say it a little bit faster using Jedi speed the way that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan
classic.
did. Speaking of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, our topic today, Matt, I'm going to throw this question out there to you just to kick things off, brought up to me by a friend at work, is what happens at the end of episode 1 if Maul manages to kill Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. Let's set aside the fact that we know that Obi-Wan has to survive for future movies. We're coming at this as if it's the first story that we're encountering. What happens next? What happens next with Anakin? What happens next with the rest of the galaxy? So what happens next if Maul wins?
See, what I like to think, you asked that question and then you preface like with the Obi-Wan thing. What I think would be really interesting is at that point, Maul, say everything else goes the same except for the duel with Obi-Wan. And basically he just leaves Obi-Wan there hanging, right? Like, how else is, And
you can't do it. You can't let Obi-Wan die, can you?
No, I can't. But mainly
Okay.
I was thinking about it because I think Obi-Wan then becomes even more pivotal to the story of, the series. And is the next film about like rescuing Anakin because he feels responsible for this boy because my thought process is he basically leaves him hanging there to die. He doesn't think he can get out of it. And maybe even, the drop is farther or something like that, whatever. He just wounds him. He thinks he's dead, he leaves him for dead. And then he takes Anakin. And now Palpatine has the Chosen One, as well as Darth Maul still alive, to wreak havoc on the galaxy at even a quicker pace than what we see, the long time period of 10 years. But we also know that he's going to need that time to train Anakin anyway, right? And so that it would be fascinating that, because the next film then wouldn't be 10 years later, right? It would probably be like a few months to maybe a year later. And then I think what would be really cool is you could have it be almost the mystery noir vibe that you get with Attack of the Clones, but it's about Obi-Wan detecting and looking for Anakin because this child is too dangerous to be kept in the hands of. And in fact, he's even defying the council by going to do this because, again, it's his responsibility. He and Qui-Gon are the ones who picked this child up. It's their fault. So I just think that makes for a really fascinating story.
That is interesting to go down that road. I initially go to what are the mechanics of it? Does Anakin still blow up the Trade Federation ship? Because the end of the Phantom Menace is that flip of the evil thinking it's winning, and then Padme turns the tables, Anakin blows up the ship, Obi-Wan turns the tables. So if Maul wins, does that mean Naboo stays captured and the Trade Federation stays in place? Or does it mean that Maul simply absconds with Anakin after he's captured on the Trade Federation ship and leaves it at that, and the Trade Federation stays in place on Naboo, serving whatever ends are there? Quick detour. I also have a desire to be cheeky and say maybe he just cuts Obi-Wan in half, and then he finds Obi-Wan several years later, insane, attached to a spider body. But we'll leave that discussion for another time. It's possible.
See, that's a good question as to whether, because my immediate thought process is that everything else is the same. It's just that Maul is able to capture Anakin and leave with him, so that good thinks it's won, but it hasn't, basically. In much the same way that, when you end the Phantom Menace, we push in on his face and Yoda's like, was it the master or the apprentice? And we all realize, no, we only got the stooge. We didn't get the real guy. And things are not going to go this is not going to go the way you think. And so I think by doing that, you almost create the same type of energy moving into that second film. But it also allows, Palpatine the ability to be corrupting, I think, the Republic even more quickly, because he has the power behind him in the sense that he doesn't have to recruit Dooku. He's got Maul, who is at the height of his powers. And I kind of think that the interesting story to me would be having Maul then begin to work with the underworld at Palpatine's behest to create this way of basically being able to kill Jedi on all these different planets. And it's really this underworld kind of uprising that then needs, okay, we either need an army or we need more Jedi or something.
That's interesting because Maul basically winds up boxed into exactly what Palpatine has him do later. For instance, in Solo: A Star Wars Story, or even in the end of the Clone Wars, Maul basically is playing the part of that. I find it interesting that you go there. That makes perfect sense that Palpatine would be using him to similar ends. But you mentioned a name in there that I think does need to be considered, which is Dooku. Now, in my version of events, Obi-Wan's dead too. Dooku is now a wild card. Do we ever meet Dooku in the story? Does Dooku come back to try to change the Jedi ways one last time to let them know this is how things got screwed up? Or is Dooku ever going to enter the story if Maul absconds with Anakin? Will that ever come into play for the galaxy? Because the thing is, also in my head, Trade Federation remains in control of Naboo, which we know Palpatine, Sidious, was going to try to use as leverage for his rise to power. The mechanics of it are awkward at that point. because I don't know how things progress in terms of, does the Trade Federation, as part of this, then go and start taking over other worlds? Is that because Phantom Menace is supposed to be where the war starts, but it doesn't because of Anakin. So is it possible that we see an entire alteration here where Anakin, absconded with by the dark side, everything shifts so drastically? And actually, let me throw this question out there as we're talking about it. It's interesting just how many different sort of threads open up here. It makes me honestly respect exactly how focused and disciplined this story is, because there's so many different things that unravel by one thing moving. Does Maul abscond with Anakin and keep him as a hidden apprentice for his play against Sidious as a Sith?
Sure. See, that's something that I think could be really interesting, is that, and I'm going to argue that Obi-Wan stays alive, because Maul is using Anakin as his own apprentice in much the way that Dooku was using Asajj, and thinks that he's keeping him hidden, but really he's doing exactly what Palpatine wants him to do, which is just basically train Anakin. So by the time that Obi-Wan meets up with them, it's too late. Like, Anakin's already gone to the dark side, and actually it would be fascinating, because in this version, at the end of movie 2, there's a big 3-way fight between Obi-Wan, Maul, and Anakin, and it is Anakin who turns the tables on Maul to actually kill him, wound Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan just gets away with his life, so that it's Anakin at the end who's basically proto-Darth Vader by episode 3.
See, at some point in the future, put a pin in this, we have to sit down on a couch and talk about your Obi-Wan thing here, because you get to this point, it's like, there's this interesting inversion, I think, right there, where Obi-Wan is facing off against Maul and Anakin. I still kill Obi-Wan in this instance, and you're giving him the out. You're just lightly wounding him. It's only a flesh wound.
Well, I didn't say lightly wounding. I said he's wounded, and he barely makes it out with his life. So,
he loses a pinky then in your telling of the story.
I haven't decided, which appendage he loses, if any. So, what I think
he
of,
gets a light
though,
singeing,
because I think what's interesting is just playing around with all of these ideas and allowing the characters to kind of basically, because I'm thinking of it as that they do have to kind of end up where you are in, episode 4. And I mean, you could make this, really dark too, in the sense of where Anakin truly betrays Padme, where she thinks that he is just somebody who hasn't become a Jedi, he hasn't turned to the dark side or whatever and everything, or it hasn't gone down that road or whatever, and just completely betrays her in that way, and then basically leaves her high and dry, So, yeah, I mean,
yeah,
so.
I don't see the twins happening in this circumstance. I see the Force responding in some different way.
Okay.
I don't see Anakin having kids in this scenario, because if Maul takes him and absconds with him during the end of the Phantom Menace, regardless of whether Obi-Wan is cut into 4 or 5 parts and left for dead, as he's just nothing but pieces.
You monster.
Hey, worse has been said about me. Where, it just changes. I don't see Padme falling in love with Anakin in any way at any point, unless we have a scenario, because we know there is an acknowledgement that Maul is like Vader, but he's not. Like, when Maul shows up, there's no question. He's not necessarily a diplomat.
Right.
Right? He's limited by his appearance as to who he can approach. Oh, look, the guy with horns and red and black tattoos on it all over his body has shown up. Do you think he's here to play nice? No. Oh, well, okay. Anakin could be in this scenario in terms of the double reversal sort of thing. Maul could bring him back to Sidious. Sidious says, okay, I have my leader for the separatist movement, and he's a pretty face. And Padme and Anakin fall in love.
That's nice.
You know, that forbidden love from opposite sides of the aisle sort of thing. And it's only until too late that she suddenly realized she's married a monster.
I think, see, that's where I think that's phenomenal. And I think that's exactly where you could kind of get to, is that, and maybe this is where it does, take 10 years later. And this is where, Obi-Wan has, as much as he has been searching for Anakin, and he's continued to do so throughout his duties, and that it's not until too late that he finds out that, this character is connected with Padme, and, what has happened to him, and then he confronts him, and it becomes this. To me, what I always find fascinating is when we have these conversations is just the way in which these characters allow for so many variations on a theme, really, and yet it's natural to kind of bring them to the conclusion that Lucas comes to, but there's so many different ways that I feel like we can play with this, and that he could have gotten there. And that's the thing that I think it's what makes these characters just so well crafted, like there's, and I think part of that, connects to the idea of them, being these archetypes to which work so perfectly. That's just, and it's something that I was thinking about, because we talked about Visions last week, and there's actually a book that's coming out called Ronin, based off of that very first short that they did in Visions. And it's kind of an inversion of, who the Jedi are and the Empire and all that kind of stuff. And it's a reimagining of all those kind of things. But doing this as a thought exercise, like what if, the ways that we do, it's so interesting to me, though, that it's hard to get too far away from where George took the characters.
Yeah, and the story is so much more dense than people give it credit for. And I think that one of the things that works against the prequels especially, and I know I've said this before, and you've said this before, so this isn't necessarily, I'm not acting as if this is a completely novel thought, but the simple fact of the matter is that when you start to do these thought exercises, like you term it, and you come at these things, you suddenly realize that in terms of story and imagination, Lucas was working just on this different level than most people do who are making movies, where it's not just simple beats to him. When you slow it all down and you realize he's just thinking in hyperspace, right? It's like, oh, okay, that is why that goes together that way. That is why the puzzle works so well. That is why all of these things seem to make so much sense. Right. Even if you're going to sit there and have a complaint about something, it still makes sense, at least. And it's a really interesting way to discover that sense of logic has disappeared from a lot of movies, and they've become sort of just Dada exercises in, I don't know, like visual overload, where just everything just has a place. And I don't know that I would want a movie, like Phantom Menace. Let's close it out here with the best question, I think, as we're sitting here with this thought exercise. Is there any part of you that would want the end of the Phantom Menace to go differently? That would want to see Maul survive and have these sorts of changes happen?
I think, having talked through it, I do feel like the characters in the storyline is so well defined. And part of this is, as you were discussing and talking through your idea, I was thinking it's because George thinks mythically, and he thinks along the lines of heroes' journeys and all of these things to which are so ingrained in the human psyche and human tradition of storytelling that it makes it so easy to be able to kind of get to where he wants to go in many different ways. And so I could see it ending differently. I could see it ending where Maul wins, and yet we still kind of end up in a place that's similar to where we end up, in so that he can get to episode 4, right? And I think that's the thing that really amazes me. Like, every time we have these type of conversations, it just amazes me that we could still find our ways back to, and George could have found his ways back to where he needs to get the characters. And the characters still go on very similar type journeys, but there's just a lot of different ways that you could move the puzzle pieces to make them fit. And I don't know. I don't. Is there another story out there in our popular media that has this much malleability? And yet, I think when I come to your question, I also think it just feels right the way it's done at the same time. Is that weird? Like, yes, I could answer yes, it could end differently, but also it feels right at the same time.
No, I don't think it's weird, because I look at, I'm looking at parts of my movie collection here right now, right? And is there a different way that I could see or would want to see an alternate ending, say, to Terminator 2? Actually, yeah. There are a couple of things where that story ends well, and I like the way that it ends, but I could be argued into a position where I could say, but this might work better. As much of these ideas as we're kicking around, and to your point, you still wind up getting back into a mold that gets you to where you need to go. I don't want Maul to win in this movie.
Right.
And I think that is the strange tension you and I might find sometimes with the people who don't care for the prequels, or specifically the Phantom Menace.
Right.
Is Maul was such a flashy, enjoyable, fun, evil character that I think there were a lot of people that didn't want him to die because they wanted him to escape, at least, or win in some way. But even from that very first viewing, I didn't want Maul to win. I wanted Maul to lose, and I wanted to see him lose. And this movie gave me that. Now, of course, I'm sure there are people that would say, yeah, but you're okay with Maul coming back later in the Clone Wars. I sure am, because it was way more creative a way to bring him back than I thought would have been done. And it tied into things in a certain way. So it was a beautiful subversion of expectations, if you will. But in the moment when I'm watching The Phantom Menace, the ending is what the ending should be. I can look at here and I can do these mind thought exercises. I don't want to see them. I want to see what happens. I want to see Obi-Wan avenge his master's death right away. I want to see Anakin be the unintentional hero of everything. And I want to see Padme make sure her planet remains free. And so, it's that sort of thing. So all that being said, I feel like we are spoiled by the fact that, being longtime fans, not only did we see Maul die in the way he needed to die for the Phantom Menace, but we got to see him come back and become one of the best characters in the entire saga. So like in a sense, I feel spoiled by the fact that I've gotten the best of both worlds with this character.
I absolutely 100% agree with you. And I think that's the thing that makes this so special, is that as we were talking about with the creativity and the way in which these characters can be malleable, George himself can be talking himself into returning Darth Maul, because he thinks of a creative way to do something, right? And so I think maybe that's one of the reasons we have so much fun with these kind of what-if conversations, is mainly because it feels like George has these conversations with himself, with his own characters. What if I did this with them? You know, and that's much of what the Clone Wars became, I think, in many ways. Like, what if I had the opportunity to do this? Because he had the time to do so, because he had the time to just sit around and think about the characters and the storylines that they would go through in the Clone Wars. And that meant, you know, characters like Darth Maul got a second life, you know, like a cat. You know, it's just, I think that's what makes it so special, and that's what kind of makes it so fun, is that it feels like the creator himself does these same type of thought experiments. At least he did when, you know, he still owned Star Wars.
And we can leave out what I would say after that for another episode that we could discuss at some point. But if people want to ask themselves, what if I reached out to Matt Rushing on social media or sought him out on other channels on the internet? They ask themselves, what if I did that? What would happen? Where would they go to find you?
Well, I would probably respond to you, as I do to pretty much anybody on social media, at MattRushing02. Here on the network, you can find me with a finished show called Owl Post with Drea Kaufman, as we talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. You can also find me over on the TFM network doing a bunch of shows. One is the 602 Club, which houses so much of that side of the network, is we're talking about all of the things outside of Star Trek, like Star Wars, Bond, Marvel, DC, I mean, all the major franchises. And in the 602 Club, of course, you can find Snyder Cuts, which is specifically all about the films of Zack Snyder, as well as Assembling Avengers in that same feed. They're bonus shows that John and I do together. So hopefully you check those out. I'm over there, too. I'm doing Literary Treks, The Orb, and Warp 5. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek. The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise. And we're actually, my friend Chris Jones and I are walking through the entire series as we're celebrating 20 years of Star Trek Enterprise. So, John, you know, maybe people are thinking to themselves, I would love to catch up with John Mills and see what he's doing on social media, and or just ask him a question. If they wanted to do that, or if they wanted to see if you were on any other podcasts, where would they go?
Well, I would suggest that they go to somebody who can counsel them out of such an action. But if they feel compelled, they can find me on social media as Kessel Junkie, KESSELJUNKIE. And you can find me actually right here on the network, co-hosting a show called House Lights, where we go through the works of directors, either their entire career, decade at a time, or whatever other crazy combination that we want to go through, including one per decade and stuff like that, like we did with Spielberg, but we're trying to be creative about it and all of those sorts of things. But honestly, I also, just like Matt said, I encourage everybody to check us out over on Snyder Cuts and Assembling Avengers, two very different types of journeys and two very different types of outcomes, I think, when it's all said and done. And, honestly, I think that people should probably write into the Jedi Temple cafeteria and say, I want more of my fried bantha bites, and I'm not getting enough. I need more bantha bites in my life. So, Jedi Master Matthew Rushing, I believe it is time to close these negotiations.
John, negotiations are closed.